Okay, everyone. So buckle in. This is going to be one of these interesting ones. So one thing to know, like those who've heard me before, like fair warning, I'm a pretty serious history buff. That's my. Before I was ever a priest, that was my training. So when you get into these kinds of things that I was asked this past week, it's like if people are coming to me saying, this crazy horror that we're hearing in the news. Like, I don't know what to think about it all, and as a, pastorally speaking, I wrote a note to our community with some basic principles on how to treat other people, how to think about these kinds of things in a Christian way. And I'll say very simply that our understanding is that there is no justification for evil acts. Like you can be treated terribly, and that still does not justify reveling in murder and other horrible acts that I'm not going to go into graphic detail about. So we can have great sympathy for people and still say that those in power are doing evil things. We also don't have to. That does not mean, and in fact should not mean, that we then flip around and say the opposite. That another side that has been victimized in a horrific way now, like all things are on the table. You can do whatever evil retaliation you want. Fundamental principle of Christianity that Jesus himself taught is, you've heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, if you are struck on the cheek, turn the other. Bless those who curse you. Bless and do not curse. Love your enemies. These are the kinds of things that Jesus taught us, and that's how we have to behave. Okay, that's as much as I'm going to say really in any detail about the current political situation. That's not what this topic is about. This is just to try to understand this a little bit, and this is going to be a very little bit of a very complicated region, and I'm going to be focusing as I was asked. I was asked specifically, could I provide some background on the biblical understanding of Palestine, the Holy Land, and Gaza. I'm almost verbatim, that's the question. So, how do we understand that? First of all, there is in the Bible the land of Canaan. That's the geographical region that's the land that is promised to Abraham. Abraham lives out in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and he's told by God that God has promised to bless Abraham if he trusts him and do as he asks. And he tells him, leave your home, travel an enormous distance to Canaan. And Canaan is on the eastern border of the Mediterranean. This is this little thin strip of land. I guess I'm going to do a little hand map. I should have we even have a map downstairs. I'm kicking myself here. But anyway, eastern Mediterranean, so you've got this lozenge-shaped sea like this, and on the far end you've got this little curvy coast, and down here near the heel of my hand, that's where Egypt is starting, this little stretch here. And then up this way, in this part you get Canaan, and then above Canaan, Lebanon, Syria, and then going into what is now known as Turkey. And that sort of comes back going along the northern coast, towards Italy and all that. So that's the geography. And so there's this land that God promises to Abraham, and he says, settle in the land of Canaan, and through you, all the nations will be blessed. This is like this kind of this foundational covenant that God makes with Abraham and with his descendants after him. Okay, now that's the starting point. It's worth mentioning this is before there's anything like Judaism. Like, there's nothing that would be, like, Abraham at this point knows very, very little. Like, God has to be very patient with him, because Abraham gets all these crazy ideas about, like, how he should be obedient to God, and some of his ideas are dumb, frankly. But fundamentally, Abraham trusts God. Like, that's his core virtue, is that he's faithful. He's faithful. He trusts God. He doesn't understand, but he trusts him. So it's worth mentioning further that Abraham has two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. From Isaac comes Jacob. Jacob is given by God the name Israel. Okay? That should be like, and Israel is the founding patriarch of this people of Israel. And there's 12 tribes that come from his 12 sons. Actually, more than that, but there are some that get lost along the way. They die out along the way. But the 12 that remain are descended from 12 sons of Jacob, Israel. And, so that's like the people of Israel. All right. Ishmael, let's just kind of put a little asterisk in here. This is not something that really is covered in any particular detail in the Bible, but Muslims understand themselves as descendants of Ishmael. And so they're tracing their lineage from Abraham as well. So that's a relevant point for later things. So we have Israel and his 12 sons are in Canaan, this land that was promised to their forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, and then Jacob, Israel. And then there's a famine. One of the sons of Jacob, Joseph, is in a position to give them shelter in Egypt. I'm not going to go into that story today, but it basically saves his whole large family and their wider household. It's not just the immediate family, but their servants, and it's a whole larger group that's all part of this household, this beginning tribe. And they migrate to Egypt, and they have a good place for themselves in Egypt for a time. But over time, there comes to be a king of Egypt that does not remember Joseph, has no fond memory of Joseph, and now sees these Israelites as a threat. And this is where God sends Moses to deliver his people from slavery in Egypt, from tyranny, and from death in Egypt. And he leads them out of Egypt through the wilderness to the promised land once again, Canaan. That's where they return to. Okay, so after a long, long journey, again, I'm not going to go into detail, they return from Egypt through the wilderness, the desert, which, let me just mention, it wasn't called this at the time, but part of that would be, the southern part of that would in fact be a bit of Gaza. Again, not called that at the time, but the very southern part, the most desert part, would be part of Gaza. The most northern part of the wilderness would be the southern bit of Gaza. That's what I'm trying to say. So they come to this land that's promised to them, and they get scared because it is filled with all sorts of other people, none of whom believe in the God of Israel. Okay, like all of the Israelites had left for Egypt hundreds of years previously. It's a long time that they've been gone. And so it's been settled with other peoples, and there is some brutal narrative of all the wars that are fought to allow the people of Israel to establish themselves in the midst of all this, a new land for themselves, okay, that they now hold. And so they defeat and drive out some of these other peoples, but they're not gone from the story. Like very few of them are just gone. There's still ones that remain. In fact, they continue to be significant challenges for the people of Israel for generations upon generations afterwards. And in fact, where Gaza shows up in the Bible is that it is the center of the Philistines. I don't know if you might recognize the Philistines from Goliath. He was a champion of the Philistines, right, who fights David many years later. But they are a major challenge all through this period for the Israelites. The Philistines are one of their bigger local competitors, and yeah, their home base is along. So the southeastern coast of this area of Canaan is the region of Gaza. So it's a thin strip right along the coast. It's like the habitable bit. There's the Sinai Desert that's between Canaan and Egypt, okay, which is really a rough country. And then you come to going up along the coastline. You come to Gaza, and that's a place that actually has cities, ports, things like that you're able to have an Iron Age civilization that we're talking about here, a Bronze Age, that kind of thing. So that's one of the significant aspects. There are others. There are other peoples. There also are some interesting things where I mentioned some of these other tribes. There are ones that kind of make a modus vivendi. They sort of decide, this whole being completely following the strict line of Jewish understanding is not realistic and reasonable. So they start to do sort of a fudge and make some compromises. So the ones that are beyond the River Jordan, okay, so we've got on the west coast, the western side of this region is the Mediterranean, so that's the coastline. And then you have the River Jordan that is, it's not a huge distance. It's all the things that you hear about in, Jesus traveling around things. None of these distances are enormous distances. But in any case, you've got a little ways, and then there's the River Jordan, and that's the primary place that most things that you hear about in the Bible, that's mostly where it's happening. It's between those two regions. Beyond the River Jordan, what will later be called Samaria and the Samaritans kind of develop. And these are people from the same general background as the rest of the Israelites, but who kind of, they're not following the scriptural teaching with the same interpretation, the same strictness, and sort of central coherence that would be established to the west of the Jordan. Okay, so you got Samaritans and other peoples to the east, to the west. That's the area that the Israelites come to dominate. They eventually thoroughly defeat the Philistines, And by this point, you have now a kingdom established. All right, so I mentioned David earlier. In his day, there's now the Israelites ask for a king. God is not thrilled with this. He's like this. Really, you've only got one king, and that's God. And you're going to regret it. I tell you now, you're going to regret it, having a king, because earthly kings starts off well, but then they start, saying, I've got a good thing going, and why should I care about what God thinks or what the people need? I should just be looking out for number one. But anyway, they say, no, we want to have a kingdom just like everybody else. So God helps them establish a kingdom. Saul is the first king, David is the second, his son Solomon is the third. Solomon establishes the most powerful Jewish kingdom that there ever is, and so he's got dominion over everything that I've been talking about. He, in fact, goes so far as to make an alliance with Egypt where he's the senior partner, which does not happen. That's not something that happens with Egypt. Egypt is always the big guy on the block. So that's like the high point of this whole thing. And so he's got this vast reach where he's making various friendly relations with nations far to the east, back in Mesopotamia, up north, towards Syria and beyond. But over this whole area that we've been focused on, he has like every bit of it. So that's the high point. Things immediately after his son succeeds him, things immediately break down. The kingdom is divided in two. There's the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judea, and they don't always see eye to eye between them. In due time, both of those kingdoms fall to foreign empires. And so we hear about the Babylonian exile. That's like this catastrophe. There are like earlier catastrophes where Israel is the northern part, Judea is the southern part, and Israel falls first. So they get ruined pretty utterly. Judea is not quite so completely ruined, but still quite thoroughly. And their leadership is entirely carried off into exile for a very long time. And so they return home, hundreds of years later, after there's been this complete cultural break. A new kingdom is established, and that is a client kingdom of successors of Alexander the Great. So they're given a modicum of independence as long as they more or less are keeping things friendly with these Greek overlords. There's some. I'm going to skip over. There's some major challenges that arise, and there's some things celebrated where they actually their whole Jewish identity is going to be extinguished, and God preserves them. That's a pretty important little moment there. But basically, they keep the flame alive, and there remains something identifiable. This Jewish kingdom at the heart of all this remains. The Romans roll in, and they also kind of take over the same thing. There's a new kingdom that gets established basically at the same point, and this is the Herodians, the line of various King Herods and other variations. But those are, again, even more so client kings under Rome. They have no real legitimacy of themselves. They're not even actually Jews. They're not really. They're not even ethnically Jewish at all. But they're setting themselves up as very self-consciously setting themselves up as like more Jewish than anybody else. Like that's kind of the way that they play this, is to really emphasize Jewish identity in some new ways. And that's kind of the dynamic at the time of Jesus. Now, what you notice, however, and I'm glossing over a lot of these details, at the time of Jesus, you notice, as he's going to different places, that the Bible going along is mostly focused on, kind of understandable, because the focus of the Bible in general is the people of God, the people of Israel, right? But you find these little hints all the way along that it's not like all the other peoples were just wiped out or went away somewhere. They're still around. There are plenty of people all the way through who are, they're not Jews, they're not Israelites. There are times when they are clearly subordinated to Jewish kings. There are times when they are making alliances with other powers and coming at Israel. So you hear about things like Moab and Edom and other local powers that are causing trouble. Lebanon is sometimes friendly and sometimes really dangerous. Syria, ditto. Less often friendly, more often dangerous. But although, it's not like there are nice hard borders with checkpoints all around here. People are drifting here and there all the way through the story. And so when you hear like Jesus traveling around, and especially Galilee, but Galilee and the regions beyond Galilee, like across the river. So we hear about, like in Galilee, there are various Gentiles mentioned. Some of those Gentiles are colonists of one kind or another. It's like this is not the way that we there's this whole kind of way of talking about colonialism today. This is 2,000 years ago that we're talking about. But anyway, point being that Greeks set up colonies all through this whole area and beyond. Way beyond, what is, there's not a nice, neat name for this region at this point. I should add, we hear Judea and Samaria and Galilee. Those are all different names that are mentioned for this area. It's broken up into different governable pieces by the Roman overlords, right? They don't want to have anybody with unified power over the whole area. So there are Greek colonies. There also are Latin colonies. There are Romans that established themselves as well. But far more than either of those are just the same Semitic peoples that have been there all along. Those Canaanites. That were, I'm not even going to attempt all the different peoples that you hear mentioned at various points in this region, but there's a lot of them, lots of them. And so they're all kind of living cheek by jowl in amongst each other. That's the kind of situation that Jesus encounters as he's traveling up and down the land. So there's a self-identifying Jewish people that is living throughout here, and they are all oriented towards the temple in Jerusalem. So that's all, one coherent thing. But then you're constantly seeing other people that are in the neighborhoods, especially, as I said, up in Galilee. That's very much true. That's the northern end of this region. And very, very much true beyond the River Jordan. That's kind of dicey territory. As it's kind of symbolically, and you hear about the Samaritans mentioned at various points, and Jesus when he talks about Samaritans, it is clear that he understands at all times that it's just, like, you don't even need to explain it. It would be a bit like to everybody else in the country, like if you mention the Yankees or the Patriots, it's like those are the bad guys, right? Like for everybody else, you don't have to say anything more. It's like boo. So likewise, for the Jews, that would be the Samaritans, and for the Samaritans, that would be the Jews. It's a lot like the old rivalry between the Red Sox and the Yankees kind of thing, because and I mentioned that deliberately because the idea is like there's geographical proximity and ethnic similarity that leads to particular suspicion and hostility. It's easier to be on friendly terms with people who are just like utterly different from you. That's like, you're not even trying. You're just a foreigner. But the ones that you really get uptight with. I mean, think about your own family. It's like, when do things get a little more friction? It's like something like, get the family reunion, family Thanksgiving, and like, oh, there's Uncle so-and-so doing his obnoxious routine again. And it's like, I can't bite my tongue. I have to let him know what a jerk he is. If it's somebody else's uncle, I mean, you're like, oh, he's funny. Like, so that's something that is there. Like this is just like obvious stuff that if you're reading the Gospels, like this just comes right off the page. These kinds of dynamics. So this is alluded to. It's not really a focus in Scripture, but it's pretty. It was really obvious to everyone writing and reading at the time of the later New Testament. Most of the New Testament is written with the knowledge of the destruction of Jerusalem. So you hear the term zealots is used occasionally, and zealots are Jews who have this vision that they can basically kind of force God's hand, and if they declare a true Jewish kingdom of Israel, that God will act powerfully and drive out the foreign tyrants and establish righteousness in Israel. And so the zealots are the people who think that's what's going to happen. You can see, again, in the gospel, there's a lot of times where you can see disciples themselves basically asking zealot kinds of questions. They're saying, when are you going to establish the kingdom? When are you going to kind of reveal yourself in power, Jesus? You're obviously the Messiah. That's what you came to do, right? To drive out these foreign powers and establish the kingdom that God promised. That the kingdom of David would last forever, right? That was the understanding that they had. When these zealots actually rise up, they are crushed by the Romans brutally, and there's just devastating results to all that. They try again, and this time Rome, they don't give you a third try. So basically what they did at that point was to just completely destroy Jerusalem, and they exiled permanently the Jewish population. So no Jews were allowed anywhere in Judea. And that remained in effect for hundreds of years. The region was already basically known generally in Roman literatures, and definitely from this point forward became known as Palestine. And that is just a Latin form of Philistia. So you can see that there's still this word that is in the mix, even though I'm pretty sure. This is not my area of expertise. I don't want to say too much, but I'm not aware of that being a going term at that time. Maybe it was. Again, that's not something I want to say with any confidence. But certainly, as a regional name, that was what the Romans settled on as the standard name, and it would remain the standard name for that area for the next 2,000 years, basically known as Palestine, this region of Palestine. So this remains part of the Roman Empire. It is conquered later by Persians. The Persians are driven back out by the Roman Empire. The Muslim Arabs conquer it, and they are not pushed out. You get temporary crusaders and all, but that's basically it from that point forward. So you have this area that is ruled by people from far away, from this time forward. Okay, so that's the sort of the human level of all this. There's another part to this that before we wrap, I really want to make clear, because how are we supposed to understand all this? So I mentioned before that the Jewish understanding was oriented towards Jerusalem and the temple. Jerusalem's been destroyed, the temple's been destroyed. Okay? But long before this, Jesus has already riled up Jewish authorities by saying that the temple is not the thing. It's like he says, the temple will be destroyed and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And everyone at the time is like, what in the world are you talking about? This is nonsense and blasphemy. But we understand that the temple he's speaking about is his own body rising from the dead. When he talks about the kingdom, and again, I mentioned how the disciples are confused. They keep wondering, when are you going to seize power? Should we get weapons and fight? And Jesus tells them, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, we would fight. But that's not what I'm here to do. And so instead, he goes voluntarily to the cross. And he sends his disciples out to preach the good news, the gospel, to all peoples. So this is a huge transition, and this is something that radically changes the perspective of Christians from Jews, and eventually leads to them being separated as two distinct religions. Christianity starts as simply the people who follow Christ, and they're all Jews to start out with. There's a big controversy later when Paul starts to focus on Gentiles and not Jews. Gentiles being it means the nations, all the people that aren't part of the covenant that's been established. They're not under the law of Moses, those kinds of things. But what we see throughout the scriptures, throughout the New Testament specifically, and its interpretation of the whole scriptures, is pointing out all the way through. So one thing that I've not really emphasized, and maybe I should have all along, but I've been covering kind of geographical and people groups and things like that. But there's another layer in the scriptures all the way through, which is speaking about how God is constantly kind of frustrated with his people, that they are not listening to him, they're not paying attention. They are focusing on minor details in the law hypocritically while neglecting the deeper matters of justice and mercy and truth. So there are these prophetic words given that speak about how he will establish a new Israel, a new Jerusalem, and his people will have the law written on their hearts, so that no one will need to tell his neighbor, know the Lord, because everyone will know the Lord. And it's this vision of a heavenly Jerusalem, a heavenly Israel. And that is the essential understanding. When we hear, as we always do in church, like, I don't know if you noticed today, the choir was singing of Israel during communion today. And by that, we don't mean the historic kingdom of Israel. We don't mean the historic people of Israel. We certainly don't mean the current nation state of Israel. We're talking about this spiritual reality of the people of God. And the Christian understanding is that there was always like there are always people who are like politically or socially or whatever organized together, and they're like recognizably the Israelites or whatever, but that there are those the vast majority are stiff-necked and rebellious and don't want to actually follow. God is constantly saying, what am I supposed to do with these rebellious people that just won't listen? And then there is a remnant. There is a faithful kernel around all that chaff. Those are the ones that, like in the parable today, hear the word of God and keep it, right? The seed lands on the fruitful soil. That's the true Israel in this Christian interpretation. And so from that time forward, Israel is understood truly to be not an ethnic group, not a political entity, anything like that. It is most authentically the people that are faithful to him. And so we're in a kind of peculiar position now, and have been for some time, where there's this political and moral claim that is made that the state of Israel is the biblical Israel, and from a religious Jewish self-understanding, that's fair enough. That's their understanding. It is not the only possible understanding. It is not it's certainly not the Orthodox Christian understanding. Other Christians, like with everything else, have kind of gone their own way with how they interpret different things. But this is like it's there in the New Testament itself. It is the core way of understanding what this is. So what that basically means is that you will hear Christians today that speak of like this necessity of politically supporting Zionism, things like that. That is not Orthodox teaching. I can say that quite simply. That there's just nothing. Frankly, it would be very hard to be a Zionist and an Orthodox Christian. That's not really. They're not really compatible because. Again, we believe that the true Zion is heaven and no earthly place. We don't believe that there are prophecies that require the kingdom of Israel to be reestablished, the temple to be rebuilt. The temple that we are looking to is, the spiritual temple that is built up the souls of the faithful people of that new Israel. So that is the general understanding of orthodoxy. That also does not mean that we must therefore, and you will hear these horrifying, unjust things argued from time to time by Orthodox Christians, that somehow there is some necessity in Orthodox teaching that we hate Jews. That also is not correct. You will see things in the Gospel, in the rest of the New Testament, in Christian literature, that can be pretty hard on the Jews, right? You will hear that. It's important to understand that rhetorically, and remember what I was saying before about like that sibling rivalry kind of thing. Well, if you think about, especially in those first few hundred years, when you have Jews like the older brother saying, "What's up with this upstart that's being such a loudmouth and getting all the attention?" And then Christians who start out being pretty thoroughly persecuted by Jews and their lives made miserable and martyred many times, getting driven out of the synagogues and being exiled from things they consider their spiritual homes. A lot of the early writings are from that perspective, basically saying to people in power, you are unjust, you are hypocrites. That's why the Pharisees come in for such abuse. The Pharisees, in many ways, were actually the ones closest to Christians in a lot of ways, but they didn't agree. They didn't go along with the Christian understanding, and so there's a lot of back and forth where they're each piling rhetorical abuse on one another. Later on, Christians get a lot more power, and as human beings, unfortunately, are tempted to do in every age, many times they use that power unjustly to persecute Jews now. It's like, now we have the upper hand, and we're going to use that badly. There's no place for that kind of thinking in authentic Christianity. Like there's no people that by who they are somehow are like under God's curse, and to be a good Christian you need to go do horrible things to Jews, or somehow Jews are like always in this conspiracy to run the world. Like none of that stuff. That's not authentic Christianity. Okay, that's something else. I guess the last thing just to say is I mentioned a long time ago about the Muslim understanding with Ishmael and how they connect back to Abraham. So that also means that Muslims feel their own rightful connection to the Promised Land, to this place, and they have their own arguments and justifications for why these things are like their rightful claim. So you got all these people closely related to one another, all historically with authentic, real connections to this land. All of them can point to different points when in history when they were the ones who were more or less running things, and like it was their place that they could kind of arrange matters the way they wanted. I don't see any nice, neat way to adjudicate all that and say this all belongs to one party and this all belongs to another. It's always been very messy. I hope that came across all the way through, and I think it's going to continue to be very messy for as long as there's anything called Israel, anything called Palestine, anything called the Holy Land. So there's a lot more that could be said. I mean, there's so many things I've like glossed over or just skipped entirely. But there you go. More than 30 minutes.